Hello, welcome to the Historical Boxing Society podcast. Today, I want to do a video on just how good Marvin Hart is. Marvin Hart boxing profile will be coming up shortly here on the countdown as he's right in the wheelhouse here of Sandy Ferguson and some of the other heavyweights of this time. But in this particular video, I want to do a trifecta of Ferguson, Jack Johnson, and Marvin Hart. Because almost a calendar year after Marvin Hart's clash with Sandy Ferguson in March of 1904, about a calendar year later, Marvin Hart gets yet another gift decision from a different referee in Alex Greggins, who was a current fighter at the time when he was doing this referee gig. And he also gave Hart the victory, which could have been a gift decision over one Jack Johnson. I am certainly not of the camp that believes Marvin Hart won the bout against Jack Johnson. And for that matter, I don't so much believe that Hart won the decision over Sandy Ferguson either. So both of those victories really contributed to Hart getting a title shot. And oddly enough, as strange as history would have it, the title bout between Marvin Hart and Jack Root, the two are separated by a pretty dramatic margin as far as the boxing simulation goes. And obviously, I am of the camp that I believe Jack Root was a far better pound-for-pound fighter than Marvin Hart, as Jack Root is ranked far ahead of Marvin Hart in the countdown here. So how good exactly is Marvin Hart? First, we're going to take you through the Ferguson versus Jack Johnson bouts here, because I just want to give you a good idea here as I lead up to what I'm trying to talk about. So bout number one, April 1903. This is 23-year-old Sandy Ferguson versus 25-year-old Jack Johnson. Their first clash, 10 rounds instead of a normal longer fight of 12 rounds. 10 rounds, and that was a legitimate loss as Johnson dominates Sandy Ferguson in the very beginning stages of him trying to establish himself. He's 1 month removed from his very first victory against anyone of significance, which would be a win over George Byers, another black fighter. And so Johnson wins pretty straightforwardly in their first encounter. Their second encounter is July 1903, a few months afterwards. This is a rather tame bout with not a lot happening. A 6-round loss, and neither fighter is trying too hard. Now, finally, we get the third encounter, which is the classic encounter. This is 24-year-old Sandy Ferguson versus 25-year-old Jack Johnson. This is December 1903, so all three of these bouts are in the same year, 1903. This is a 20-round loss, and according to my interpretation, this is a bout that really where Sandy Ferguson really laid the blueprint on how to beat Jack Johnson. Now, Ferguson lost this bout. It's a 20-round loss, but I want to point out that Ferguson indeed won rounds in this bout, and not only did he win rounds, but he dropped Johnson in the fight. So this wasn't this complete stonewall by Jack Johnson. And in fact, it is after this third bout, the most significant one with Jack Johnson in December of 1903, when of all the odd things in the world, Jack Johnson becomes one of Ferguson's biggest fans. And not only does Ferguson compliment one Sandy Ferguson, not only does Jack Johnson compliment Sandy Ferguson, but he indeed indicates to the press that Sandy Ferguson would be probably the top fighter for Jim Jeffries. From this point on, from the January of 1904, as we go down, Sandy Ferguson is often mentioned as a candidate for Jim Jeffries' next opponent, and certainly should have been, as Sandy Ferguson was certainly more deserving of one Monroe. Jack Monroe, he really wasn't any type of a significant fighter on the boxing landscape, just kind of a flash in the pan that really didn't even deserve himself a chance and was extremely uncompetitive in their match with Jeffries. So, as I digress here, bout 4, February 1904, Jack Johnson. This is a 5-round no contest. This was a fake bout, as Johnson and Ferguson, as I stated, were actually pretty friendly. And much like their second bout, they didn't try very hard. And this one, they were actually booed, and the bout was stopped as a fake. So, pretty big stain for Johnson as he's pulling off fake bout. Next, we have the last bout, Jack Johnson, number 5, July 1905. This is the following year, and this is where they meet in a packed house. This is a very great article on one of the Ring Magazine articles on this bout here, as this is a 7th-round loss via DQ, where Ferguson hits Johnson in the groin, and Johnson goes down and has to get carried to the dressing room, as he sustains substantial damage in here, as Ferguson did him a little dirty. But one of the things that makes this bout a great reading is that Ferguson, like some of his previous bouts, via loss of disqualification, starts damn near riot, and the people are really pissed, and the place is completely overcrowded, and patrons that are paying are unable to get themselves to an exit, as pandemonium breaks loose, and it's a rather big stain on the boxing world, and actually one of the matches that Jeffries cites as Johnson being unworthy, which was completely bogus, because Johnson certainly didn't lose the fight because of his skill. He lost because he got hit in the groin. But as we go back to the trifecta of the three of them, Hart wins the match against Ferguson because of late round activity, and then Hart wins because he's supposedly the aggressor against Johnson, which I guess they're putting a pretty high standard on ring aggressiveness as opposed to other forms of scoring, as in particular the Ferguson-Hart bout. Hart hits the canvas 2 times, 2 different rounds. He hits the canvas. Only 1 round does Hart actually have Ferguson in trouble. It's a 20-round bout, and Hart wins the match, having hit the canvas twice, with Ferguson not hitting the canvas at all. Ferguson, as we will learn in his boxing profile, is not exactly your standard white hope, as he's pretty good defensively. He fights out of a crouch, and the one thing that Ferguson is described at throughout all of his beginning of his matches is being a fast fighter. He's not a slow, clumsy, big white hope. He's a fast fighter with very good footwork, and Johnson states in there when he's praising Ferguson about how he's able to come in at different angles, and Johnson has a hard time telling just where the punch is coming from, and one of the reasons why Johnson falls down in some of the matches is because Ferguson's ability to change his angles in fighting out of a crouch, as Johnson didn't particularly have a solid jab going. He was kind of a pairing puncher, and Ferguson causes him a lot of problems. In fact, when he becomes a heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, he states right in the press that the one fighter he wants nothing to do with is one Sandy Ferguson. He does not want to have a sixth match against Sandy Ferguson, as I'm sure he's more than worried what Ferguson will do to him if he aggravates him, as Ferguson literally injured him pretty severely in the last bout of Jack Johnson number 5. So was Marvin Hart really that good of a boxer? The one thing that always is going to come to my mind is that I did a profile a few boxers back on one Kid Carter. I have absolute tremendous respect for Kid Carter. He was one of the most powerful middleweights of all time. Tremendous punch. Could come back from severe beatings and get himself a win. And Hart dominated one Kid Carter. So we know for a fact that Hart has got a pretty high ceiling to be able to dominate Kid Carter, in my opinion. Neither Ferguson or Jack Johnson did Marvin Hart dominate. In fact, Hart, the one thing that really is setting him back, and one of the reasons why he didn't want to have the rematch with Ferguson, is that he's basically a Kentucky plumber. He really didn't have any amateur background, and his particular fighting skills were not quite as refined as these boxers that had years and years of much more experience than one Marvin Hart. When Hart faces Ferguson, Hart is actually 3 years older than Ferguson, but he has far, far less experience rounds than Ferguson. As Ferguson debuted in 1898, he was much more experienced, even though he was quite a bit younger than Hart. And Hart finally gets himself 2 gift decisions over one Ferguson and Jack Johnson, as we see by the headlines here. Jack Johnson says he was robbed, which will become a familiar theme for him, as every time he loses, he's going to say that he's robbed. But in this particular instance, he has a pretty legitimate statement in saying that he was robbed from one Marvin Hart, as Hart certainly, I don't think, deserved the decision in any aspect. And 2 gift decisions got him the opportunity to fight Jack Rutt, as we will see when we go through Hart's profile, just what exactly happened in that match. But I can tell you, on the historical simulation viewpoint, Rutt is a far superior pound-for-pound fighter than Marvin Hart. So in culmination, one of the things I would have to say is that Hart did a little bit of overachieving, as probably his natural ability was not that outstanding, but he was able to get the most out of his natural ability. And one thing with Marvin Hart that really actually derailed his career is when he lost his trainer. After the Jack Johnson bout, he got a little bit of a big head. He indeed fired one of his trainers, and from that point on, he never trained as hard again, and he was not in shape for some of the further matches. And as we see, even though Hart is ranked below one Tommy Burns when they fight for the championship, little people know, but another Ring Magazine article, but Tommy Burns kind of did Hart pretty dirty in that match by rubbing some substances in his eyes, and really caused Hart tremendous frustration, and derailed his focus and determination during the match. And as Burns just kind of cruised to a victory over a blinded and semi-frustrated Marvin Hart. And after that, Burns never would grant him an opportunity for a rematch, which there certainly should have been a rematch. And Burns probably felt that he got away with one over Marvin Hart, and never gave him the chance to prove himself again, much like Hart never gave Ferguson a chance to prove himself again. It's just kind of the way it runs. But in historical viewpoint, I would say Ferguson and Hart are neck and neck. Who is better is for you to determine, but they're certainly right on the level of being right next to each other. So, as we know, Hart got himself some gift decisions and walked himself into a heavyweight title match that he may not have really even legitimately earned. So, Marvin Hart, you were a boxer that certainly got the very most out of your ability. We have to give you credit for that. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give me a thumbs up.